ꯉꯁꯤꯒꯤ lectureꯁꯦ ꯑꯩꯈꯣꯏꯅ ꯃꯃꯥꯡꯒꯤ ꯀ꯭ꯂꯥꯁꯇ ꯂꯧꯈꯠꯈꯤꯕ ꯃꯣꯗꯔꯅꯤꯖꯝ ꯍꯥꯏꯔꯤꯕ ꯑꯗꯨꯒꯤ ꯃꯈꯥ ꯇꯥꯔꯛꯄ lecture ꯑꯃ ꯑꯣꯏꯒꯗꯣꯏꯅꯤꯀꯣ ꯑꯩꯈꯣꯏꯒꯤ BEGC 112 British Literature Early 20th Century ꯀꯣ ꯁꯤꯁꯦ ꯑꯩꯈꯣꯏ ꯃꯣꯗꯔꯅꯤꯖꯝꯒꯤ ꯄꯤꯔꯤꯌꯗꯇ ꯕꯦꯁ ꯇꯧꯕꯅꯤꯅ ꯑꯩꯈꯣꯏ ꯃꯣꯗꯔꯅꯤꯖꯝꯗ ꯃꯈꯥ ꯇꯥꯅ ꯑꯩꯈꯣꯏ ꯅꯩꯅꯈꯤꯒꯅꯤ ꯕ꯭ꯂꯣꯛꯅ ꯕ꯭ꯂꯣꯛ ꯅꯝꯕꯔ 1 ꯃꯣꯗꯔꯅꯤꯖꯝ ꯑꯗꯨꯒ ꯌꯨꯅꯤꯠꯅ ꯌꯨꯅꯤꯠ ꯅꯝꯕꯔ 2 ꯀꯣ ꯌꯨꯅꯤꯠ ꯅꯝꯕꯔ 1ꯗ ꯑꯩꯈꯣꯏ ꯃꯣꯗꯔꯅꯤꯖꯝꯒꯤ ꯃꯇꯥꯡꯗ ꯑꯩꯈꯣꯏꯒꯤ ꯃꯥꯒꯤ ꯀꯗꯥꯏꯗ ꯂꯥꯛꯄꯅꯣ ꯀꯔꯤꯒꯤ ꯀꯩ ꯍꯥꯏꯇꯥꯔꯦ ꯀꯔꯤꯗ ꯐꯣꯀꯁ ꯇꯧꯏ ꯀꯣ ꯑꯗꯩꯗꯤ ꯃꯣꯏꯁꯦ ꯍꯧꯔꯛꯐꯝ ꯑꯗꯨ ꯀꯔꯝꯕ ꯄꯤꯔꯤꯌꯗꯇ ꯃꯣꯏꯁꯦ ꯌꯥꯝ ꯄꯣꯄꯨꯂꯔ ꯑꯣꯏ ꯑꯗꯩꯗꯤ ꯔꯥꯏꯇꯔꯁ ꯑꯐꯥꯎꯕ ꯈꯔ ꯑꯩꯈꯣꯏ ꯂꯣꯏꯅꯃꯛ ꯅꯩꯅꯈ꯭ꯔꯦꯀꯣ ꯈꯔ ꯕ꯭ꯔꯣꯗꯂꯤ ꯍꯥꯏꯕ ꯇꯥꯔꯦꯀꯣ ꯆꯥꯎꯔꯥꯛꯅ ꯅꯩꯅꯈ꯭ꯔꯦ ꯉꯁꯤꯒꯤꯁꯤꯅ ꯁ꯭ꯄꯦꯁꯤꯐꯤꯛ ꯑꯣꯏꯅ ꯄꯣꯏꯇ꯭ꯔꯤꯗ ꯁꯩꯔꯦꯡꯗ ꯍꯥꯏꯕ ꯇꯥꯔꯦꯀꯣ ꯑꯩꯈꯣꯏꯒꯤ ꯑꯦꯅꯥꯂꯥꯏꯁꯤꯁ ꯇꯧꯕꯁꯦ ꯖꯥꯟꯔꯥꯒꯤ ꯀꯦꯇꯦꯒꯣꯔꯤ ꯑꯣꯏꯅ ꯌꯦꯡꯉꯛꯑꯅꯤ ꯃꯊꯪꯗꯅ ꯑꯩꯈꯣꯏ ꯅꯣꯚꯦꯜ ꯀꯩꯀꯥꯗ ꯂꯥꯛꯀꯅꯤꯀꯣ ꯑꯗꯨꯅ ꯉꯁꯤꯒꯤ ꯂꯦꯛꯆꯔꯁꯤꯗꯤ ꯃꯣꯗꯔꯅꯤꯖꯝ ꯏꯟ ꯄꯣꯏꯇ꯭ꯔꯤ ꯍꯥꯏꯔꯤꯕ ꯑꯩꯈꯣꯏꯒꯤ ꯁꯩꯔꯦꯡꯗ ꯐꯣꯀꯁ ꯇꯧꯔꯒ ꯑꯩꯈꯣꯏꯅ ꯑꯦꯛꯖꯥꯝꯄꯜꯁ ꯈꯔ ꯁ꯭ꯇꯗꯤ ꯇꯧꯔꯒ ꯍꯥꯏꯕ ꯇꯥꯔꯦꯀꯣ ꯑꯩꯈꯣꯏꯒꯤ ꯐꯦꯃꯁ ꯔꯥꯏꯇꯔꯁ ꯃꯤꯡ ꯑꯣꯏꯅ ꯄꯜꯂꯕꯗ ꯑꯩꯈꯣꯏꯒꯤ ꯅꯣꯏꯁꯨ ꯍꯥꯟꯅꯗꯒꯤ ꯑꯗꯨꯝ ꯑꯦꯅꯥꯂꯥꯏꯁꯤꯁꯁꯨ ꯇꯧꯔꯝꯃꯅꯤ ꯄꯥꯁꯨ ꯄꯥꯔꯝꯃꯅꯤꯅ ꯂꯧꯏ ꯑꯦꯖꯔꯥ ꯄꯥꯎꯟ ꯍꯣꯏ ꯂꯩ ꯀꯣ ꯇꯤ.ꯑꯦꯁ. ꯑꯦꯂꯤꯌꯠ ꯍꯣꯏ ꯂꯩ ꯃꯌꯥꯝ ꯑꯃ ꯂꯩꯈ꯭ꯔꯦꯀꯣ ꯑꯗꯩꯗꯤ ꯑꯩꯈꯣꯏꯒꯤ ꯅꯣꯕꯦꯂꯤꯁꯇ ꯍꯥꯏꯔꯒꯅ ꯉꯁꯤꯕꯨꯗꯤ ꯑꯩꯈꯣꯏ ꯄꯣꯏꯇ꯭ꯔꯤꯗꯅꯤꯀꯣ ꯑꯩꯈꯣꯏꯒꯤ ꯅꯣꯕꯦꯜꯁꯀꯨꯝꯕꯗ ꯍꯥꯏꯔꯒꯅ ꯑꯩꯈꯣꯏꯒꯤ ꯖꯦꯝꯁ ꯖꯣꯏꯁꯀꯨꯝꯕ ꯀꯩꯒꯨꯝꯕ ꯃꯊꯪ ꯃꯊꯪ ꯅꯩꯅꯔꯛꯇꯣꯏꯅꯦꯕ ꯑꯗꯨꯅ ꯉꯁꯤꯒꯤ ꯂꯦꯛꯆꯔꯁꯦ BEGC 112 British Literature Early 20th Century-ꯗꯅꯤ ꯑꯗꯨꯒ ꯕ꯭ꯂꯣꯛꯅ ꯕ꯭ꯂꯣꯛ ꯅꯝꯕꯔ 1 Modernism ꯑꯗꯨꯒ ꯌꯨꯅꯤꯠꯅ ꯌꯨꯅꯤꯠ ꯅꯝꯕꯔ 2 Modernism in Poetry-ꯅꯦꯕꯀꯣ ꯑꯩꯈꯣꯏ ꯃꯈꯥ ꯇꯥꯅꯕ ꯇꯧꯔꯁꯤꯀꯣ Aims and objectives ko ngasi lecture sige. At the end of this unit, you would have learned about akhina kai learn tawdani ko meaning of the term modernist with special reference to art and literature. Amna modernist habi se kari. Modern haraga akhoi gi anoba hujing matam da haraga diko. Yamna contemporary oiba adurnian logudra or akhoi modernism haiba kanta modernist haiba kanta kari da akhoi specify tawraga analysis to biya habi yingdunya. Aduga kari reference art amasung literature da focus tawraga modernism haiba ko atopa category atopa genre atopa section da natabida ko art and literature da yama focus tawraga akhoi analysis to biya. Paleo modernism and neo modernism term ani ko and difference between the two ani je kari kene ko awai term na kari kari refer to rino aduga kari kari jaga da mabani ki khenaba haiba tare ko difference kai kai haiba chu ko ngasi learn tawrani aduga characteristics of modernism with emphasis on modernist poetry ana modernism ki characteristics haiba de magi magun haiba ko kari kari akoina work amaje modernism की work amani modernistic oiba work amani habse akoina kamaina decide to bi bangai dikta haibi apte natra modernist oigi haragadi kari kari parameters fulfill to badakar tai haiba mayam to ko aduga emphasis on modernist poetry nasi ki lecture ji ayamba akoina poems ta haiba tare saireng ko poetry da yama focus to ina awda yama focus to ni ko tung tarakpa lecture sing da ko novels ta kaida ko adidi even drama haiba tare ko adugum da ko focus to rokini just nasi ki lecture ji akoina ayamba poetry da oina focus to aduga relationship between tradition and modernism amna tradition ga modernism ga apina taba kanda yamna dichotomic oiba relationship ama leiba malaga yamna paradoxical oiba relationship am leram doine ko adu jo koina nena dori ne masi myam jida ne ba koina satra singda modernism gi matang da haiba kanda moi da yamna confusion leiba haiba tare kitang kangau na ko kitang confusion leiba doubt leiba ko modernism haiba define to hairaga ta haiba ngam da ko aduna madu myam du ko koina masigi doubt sing du clear to ko na ba masigi lecture jo koina deliver to do ko aduga finally masigi aim da characteristics of modernist poetry on the modernist poetry ki characteristics ko kari kari magun cheli example man ko laga ta example Eliot ki the Wasteland hairjine ko yamna controversial mati hairer oge yamna critic tawba yamna toina debate tongnaba magi work amani critics karana celebrate tawi critics karana yamna defeatist oiba attitude ulena moina kara kai tare negatively ko in a negative light ta moina portray tawi adu myam do kuin isa na mu paraga isa isa gi preference ju le ko ki art amasung literature haibs da ti ki isa na pamba pamda haibs sum le na example am lokalaga masini modernist poetry haibagi epitome haibetare ko epitome ꯒꯤ ꯑꯦꯛꯖꯥꯝꯄꯜ ꯑꯃ ꯍꯥꯏꯔꯒ ꯉꯁꯤ ꯑꯦꯂꯤꯌꯠꯀꯤ ꯋꯦꯁꯂꯦꯟꯗ ꯈꯤꯇꯪ ꯑꯦꯅꯥꯂꯥꯏꯁꯤꯁ ꯃꯆꯥ ꯑꯃ ꯍꯥꯏꯕ ꯇꯥꯔꯦ ꯇꯧꯒꯗꯣꯏꯅꯦꯕꯀꯣ ꯑꯗꯨꯅ ꯉꯁꯤꯒꯤ ꯑꯦꯝꯁ ꯑꯦꯟ ꯑꯣꯕꯖꯦꯛꯇꯤꯚꯁ ꯑꯩꯈꯣꯏ meaning of term modernist haibse karino haibada ko ninaragani with special reference to art and literature art amasung literature da yamba focus toraka modernist art haibse kaino modernist literature haibse kaino maduna ko ingise adidi paleo modernism amasung neo modernism ko ani je karino atuka mabani je kari khene haibadum je hum subada characteristics of modernism with emphasis on modernist poetry dong focus toraka के मॉडर्निज्म की कैरेक्टरिस्टिक्स करी करी चेली को हाइबदी ए मसीगी वर्क से मॉडर्निस्ट वर्क अमनी हायरगदी करी करी पैरामीटर्स फॉलो तो होतुई अदु मैम को अदुगा रिलेशनशिप बिटवीन ट्रेडिशन एंड मॉडर्निज्म अन ट्रेडिशन का मॉडर्निज्म को से यामना ऑपोजिट एंड्स ऑफ द स्पेक्ट्रम हायरगने को इंग्लिश हायरगने को यामना लापनाबा मानमगा अनीसिगी मरक्ता यामना पैराडॉक्सिकल ओइबा हाइबा तारे रिलेशनशिप अमा कोई उबा फंगनी मदुले भी इंग्लिश अदुगा फाइनली characteristics of modernist poetry on the modernist poetry singi characteristics ko kari kari magun cheli kari qualities yawi habatare ko mogi parameters kamai define to wi poetry da habatare poem sing ko aduga poem ma lokalaga ko analysis to madu ne ko ni try to do this next slide. The term modernist associated with 20th century is misunderstood as a chronological development starting with the beginning of 20th century and spanning the full century. Oh no, today I'm doing a modernism or modernist ki matang da confusion ama haibitare yam toina mina confusion leiba samam na leiba jaga ama lei kari no haiba kanta modernist hairaga di ko miyamna lan khalije misunderstand to kari no haiba kanta chronological development chronological hairagadi matam na porko development hai tare ko 20th century horpadagi laga aduka 20th century pulap sibu akuina modernistic or modernist period nen laweba masi akoi langani ko it is not as though all those who wrote from 1900s are level modernist writers on the 1900s adai dagi horaga matung tarakko singona modernist writers natane habati langani ko adugi wa auna modernist yawi modernist oidabi yawi ko masa masa gi preference ni aduna umbrella period ama sinara ko 20th century horapadagi matugi century duma irako kuduma modernist writers ni modernistic oi hairgasu lanba habdo legani adune mining is the term modernist as it is applied to arts and literature music and dance sculpture and architecture designates a distinctive kind of imagination which to begin with seems obscure and therefore difficult to apprehend at the elemental level. Oh no, modernists have said sculpture to be architecture to be music to be dance to be literature to be arts to be message kari habitare yamna distinctive have yamna unique oiba imagination da yamna unique oiba makhalama gi section am habitare ko yamna obscure ba haragadi common knowledge oitaba ko common oitaba jibu pin obscure ba ko avna yamna line understand to bangam oitaba moiba modernism haragadi ko or modernist haragadi madu da neba sida kuigi confusion gum khara leris aduna modernism or modernist literature ama study to boho buda obscurity se yamna common organi madugi obscurity to maram moraka aikuigi readers in the academicians in the habitat moida kitang confusion doubt challenges habitat ko khara tin hangani ba auna modernist approach se kitang lui habitat ko complex oi harake lui ba hydrology ko aduna moise 20th century hobodagi 20th century pulap simak modernist writers ki period ne habisu langani kaina bu kana matam du da irakpada modernist ki quality or modernist ki themes habitat modernist ki thought habitat ko myam chen da writers to bu lei ko na moi pulap 20th century ki writers kudima modernist writers ne harakati there would be a mistake ko aduni introduction. It demands some degree of acquaintance with ancient and classical texts from different parts of the world. Oh, now modernist ki understanding se akoina fazana clear cut oina understand tawge haragadi akoina khara khangba mataga type acquaintance haragadi familiar ohin ba hai koi sa ancient amasung classical texts akogi Greeks akogi Romans example in higher ko European Eurocentric oi se haragana ko awda akogi tang understand tawda ka try akogi matam classical antiquity have tare adugi matam da iramba mong ko iramba themes ta have ai iramba mogi pattern have ai ko mong have ai ko dumya. Thus, obscurity is the first defining characteristic of modernist literature. Now, modernist literature ki quite obvious oiba characteristic karino haragati obscurity never understand the wab. Have the matamama the irambadina of modern times have tare ko 20th century tawina understand the kara challenging of it. This unit will introduce modernist poetry, which is different from poetry written prior to this period, and thereby appreciate why it is difficult to understand. Auna nasiki section sida ko nasiki lecture sida modernist poetry ko mamang the 19th century da have tare ko akogi realism romanticism ko mayam neoclassical literature mayam dagi kenarakpa ko aduga modernism or modernistic have tare ko writing style ja akuna si approach to godoni aduga akoina understand to the luri se kari ki no have to adu so akoina ngasi naina ga tori buneba and appreciate to ngaba have tare ko kitang understand to the luraga ju kitang challenging oraga ju yamna fulfilling oiba have tare yamna akoina understand to rakanda di understand to ngam makanda di amna kun appreciate to ngam me ko matam gi works things tuna yes lambi ji kitang luraga ju akoina fasna understand to ragati akoina appreciate to fasna ngam gani ba modern poems or modern poets in ko nasi section ji modernism in art and literature ko Modernism began in late 19th century and profoundly shaped 20th century art and literature. Oh no, 19th century loramdai da horakpani aduga 20th century se 19th century loramdai haragati 1890s 1880s adai da lorji ko aduga profoundly shaped 20th century agadi 1900s ni ko hojik se koi 21st century ni ko 20 no hori se ko it reached its height between 1910 and 1930. Aduga mogi kwaidigi famous over period kwaidigi myamna mogi zenith haiba tare ko mogi period to kwaidigi wangba tangkaksina 1910 dagina 1930 bokuni a period marked by upheaval and suffering of World War I. Ona World War I je koi khangi duni 1914 dagi 1918 bo thengnaki masi war je ko adugi manung duda World War I manung the neba kugi modernist poets or modernist writers na moigi highest excellence have the highest point of excellence kuina muina yobangam grips yet also by remarkable cultural creativity on the 1910 amasung 1930 mogi period se chumi lanjao muji toki copy chubi ahan balanjao World War I toki adubu cultural creativity sphere da su yamna chakotpa matam ne sigise on nakana madana Europe amasung North Africa da lan chawm thing ba aduga nakana madana cultural creativity da ju yamna chawna wave ama lakpa ko ona 1910 da 1930s gi period chibu akoina modernist writers singi highest point and low major British writers of this movement modernist movement have included kana yaw have the haningi T.S. Eliot or the Westland iba ko the preludes kind of noina if you remember manipur board ta mo puer ga ko class 10 daga yaw ko syllabus habidi yamna relevant oiba point ina magi writing sing magi work sing je yam knowing edigi dum kugi syllabus ta yaw have tare ko odai WB Yeats ajina kugi no ikang mujhe Rabindranath Tagore gi Gitanjali ga dumana English ta onto kind of magi advice have tare ko man ga prologue to be even ko man I think forward have tare me even Ezra Pound ko one of the greatest modernist one of the best modernist writers have magi cantos kana the cantos magi collection of poetry ko adwa levni there is James Joyce mana Ulysses iba there Dubliners kind of ibko James Joyce yamna paabda yamna challenging oiba but yamna quality labor writer ni already Virginia Woolf later nupi da hire gana ko Mrs. Dalloway iba to the lighthouse ko already atopos karjo labor ni ko magi ko ina paabda is Dalloway ka to the lighthouse pare already and D.S. Lawrence hire gana we can later Sons and Lovers ko already lady Centralist lover kind of labor ko nuju paramani in khali while Europe produced figures such as Rainer Maria Rilke, she's a famous writer, ni Marcel Proust is a French writer, magi work yamna famous oiba yamna challenging oiba kari. In Search of Lost Time, magi lai amlebani ko magi work nama ko atu duni ma iramani Kafka le ko Kafka de ko Hydrogen ni khanar batani magi na The Metamorphosis ko pa ge harakadi the Castle the Trial ko America habam dule ni ko magi and Thomas Mann is a German writer I think German writer ni masin yamna famous work like ko magi so auna sugma myam jida mogi period se ko modernism gi writers sing je I mean karawina pallabda sim yam jini adu mogi work sing je yamna famous oiba yamna culturally relevant oiba works myam mira me ko sayeng poiro novels poiro. First World War also gave rise to the war poets. Yes, war poets I say quickly First World War da land da di changurapa lanmi sing na ko moina ju saireng irakpa mogi experiencing ko mogi awaba mogi challenges ko mogi mamana sing lan jaw to the habitat ko First World War to the ka dagi da bagi moina ka pian da pungtu bagi saireng gi ba Siegfried Sassoon ko maming na palamda Wilfred Owen kind of tamakani ko amatu myam yaure whose work adopted a strong anti-war stance adi lan chalakanta Dulce et decorum est it is better to die for one's country ka habra kaino dum ya phazabani ko jo no gi syllabus ta graduation level da yarakani now the moina amu first hand experience phangabani na ko lan changubagi lan thengnabagi awa bu thengnaramina matam du da lan chalu cho kaina ka ko gi politicians sing na matam gi ko ko gi leaders in the hierarchy countries in leaders in the nahas in the youth sing the lanchalu so namaleba ki damakta thawai thaba ngamgadabni ko kadabni brave ogadabni courageous ogadabni sacrifice ogadabni ka haraga koi ki nahasing jida masada confidence hapaga namaleba ki damakta moi sacrifice to ki handabi sacrifice to naba kan tharaga on reality to di yamna khenarambada ko just for a First World War manung da jo trench warfare gumba no ju paramani ko history to yam relevant orakani for a few meters of land have that column jo no man's land daga grenade ke di thadara land mine gumba thamani audai di trench warfare gumba toroga ki akut pa jaga sang tawraga ko lanje 6 months 8 months gumba de gi tholok ta bidar lang ngan kamnar leba sniper toroga yamna wa ba have that dong ju salakani ko di infection gumba toroga aduna lan chaluba Wilfred Owen hoy Isaac Rosenberg hoy ko the Siegfried Sassoon hoina thengna ba singdo moina saireng form the iraga there is nothing glorious habitat ko glorious or ko pa kemnai ko te kana mon reality do to ko but the anti war ogi magun na chele ko First World War anti-war stance and develop a new poetic language to express the realities of conflict na moina poetic way amada reality to ko haibadi lana isaluraga alaga medal kar pangaga sagi sacrifice orga du natte every day moje under constant fire the leduni odai nuju khang gani hujuma tan PTSD ka have to ko post traumatic stress disorder ga la chalur matunda imala kanda normal life da halakpangam daba odai masado kani panic tor level ko padum yam tu loi ma yaw ni usit other notable poets include Wilfred Owen, Siegfried Sassoon, and Isaac Rosenberg. Although they earned great admiration, their influence was limited compared to Eliot and Yeats. To me, Wilfred Owen hoy Sassoon hoy ko moi se recognize with them to be appreciate to we ko moi quality do but Eliot hoy Yeats again na bakanta TV popularity do Eliot when he held na ko di one whose work before and after the war left a lasting impact on English poetry. Eliot hoy Yitsun iramba lan mamang iramba lan matung iramba works man da huji pawda yam relevant oiriba madun Realism and naturalism aim to represent ordinary life, often through slice of life portrayal. On realism ga naturalism ga akoigi day to day ordinary life se mona utnaba honaba slice of life ki mong da ko habiti no ki wiki ka haitare yamna exceptional oidaba ko yamna mundane oiba hairagene ko adum bai mong du ibdo. In modernist literature and art, however, realism was replaced by various isms such as Impressionism, Expressionism, Cubism, Dadaism, Surrealism, and Futurism. Adubu modernist works in the literature amasung art diko. Hana leramba realism je replaced the great Impressionism art ki form agani ko Expressionism da haise ko habiti express the wire gadi without any logical reasoning like the bida in power to we emotion to express on the whole of the expressionism ka cubism higher than like we Pablo Picasso na ka mayam na forefront le ram ba mo do dadaism surrealism higher the we example na the Salvador Dali hoy ko the persistence of memory kind of like ko magi artwork thum do yang kan da mu can understand to ko kari hani no da and futurism I think matam da we future rum da chalakpa science and technology ki progress ko adum yam de focus ore on na han le ram ba realism kumba kai kumba gi genre to ko matung da thamaga impressionism expressionism cubism dadaism surrealism kumba focus ore. While many of these originated in art, some strongly influenced literature. On the art tagi mayamna ayambana ko sida haije cubism, dadaism, expressionism, impressionism mayamje art tagi lakpa ngane. Adubu moina mo art tagi atopada mo sip through to haitare phawjalak pa haitare ko. Aduga literature zu mo impact hoeba. Literary impressionism reflects the writer's immediate perceptions and experiences, while expressionism emphasizes emotion over logical meaning. And hujika habta ko logical oiba perfect oiba wahi bata thibi muta ko isana phawbu jo itopa habit art haragana aina scenery mu example in harage ko the perfect muta isana phawri to express to adu neba expressionism hai ko the technique follow to ba perfect oiba stroke to sin na ba trap pen brush ki to me focus of the bida directly raw emotion raw kahitare feelings me am on the basis oraga when express of the expressionism ki quality maneba rejecting realism to explore psychological or spiritual reality on realism to that everyday life ko yam realistic oiba portrayal the tumda thamaga psychological amasung spiritual reality na focus tor ko ja masina kuigi art and literature da modernism da yam achauba way ko malak pa ho to re ko matu nothing is strike on Constructivism in literature stresses that knowledge is shaped by personal and social experience. Constructivism na hari je knowledge se objective oiba ko haibadi objective oiba universal oiba lekti habi mo ko ona knowledge se personal and social experience akoina thengnaruba akoina phawruba da ki knowledge se shape to ne lowe. In fiction, modernism is associated with writers like Kafka lere ko we khangabani and Joyce, James Joyce niko, and techniques such as stream of consciousness. Stream of consciousness is James Joyce amasung Virginia Woolf na magi Mrs. Dalloway dako. Yang fazana portrait of it. James Joyce na magi Dubliners ko, or the Ulysses te yang fazana explain to it. These movements reshaped poetry, fiction, and drama, and led to new literary theories. On a literary theory, ano ko, aduna putore hanalerem da bhai batare ko. And aesthetic manifestos the rules making the 20th century an age of literary theory. On the 20th century, literary theory age more. Modernist literature is marked by innovation, imagination, and a powerful impact on intellectual and creative thought. On the modernist literature, innovation, rules, system, innovation, the imagination, the personal experiences to focus over, such as personal growth to focus over, and a powerful impact on intellectual and creative thought. On the creativity to focus over. hana leramiba for example rules regulation set of rules kumba ko adu myam thadoga akoina anoba ma semaga atugi anoba mongduda irakpa yeglakpa haiba taina ko we art hayabni ko semakpa sarakpa adu ne ko gi art and literature the modernism gi way ma lai haise characteristics of modernism with reference to modernist poetry ona characteristic of modernism gi kari kari mapun cheli ko aduka kari doina focus oda modernist poetry da yam bi yenga ko adu yenga modernism in art and literature implies a break from tradition and a willingness to challenge accepted norms ona hana leramba hana chummi follow togodabuni sumain togodabuni khokodabuni na leramba rules myam to thugairaga or rules myam to discard tawraga habitare ko challenge to bungamba anova puthoga ko hana leramba norms singdubu overpower tawraga anova norms semangamba in everyday terms being modern suggests rejecting rigid beliefs and daring to be different ana hojik matam so everyday terms so modern oi bahara gadi karino hana leramba rules kumba rigid oi ba chanabi kumba kai kumba jibu we challenge so ngamba jibu kun modern oi ban hydra maduneba the modern movement was guided by the slogan make it new coined by Ezra Pound. On Ezra Pound, there was a point to I have the cantos even the part of Maze modernism signing figure of modernism analysis of the modernism understand the Ezra Pound to be at it. Who urged artists to reshape elements of the past for contemporary use rather than discard tradition entirely. On the Sida, a quick another same Baharaga tradition, Loyamo Kundo tradition, discard to have native. Hana lerma mong to reshape tawraga anoba mong semapa ko hana koi foundation ni daga taina ko hana lerma foundation to gai na tab hana lerma foundation do anoba mong de semgalaga anoba mong de irak putne mana pamis mana slogan pire je ko na modernist poetry je tradition je paradoxical relationship am ubangami modern oraga zo moi tradition thadokte tradition to moi semdu bi have ko anoba mong de sem nothing is like logical. A key example is the Westland. Saina Pankrava saying the famous syllabus is graduation level by T.S. Eliot, which weaves together Holy Grail legend. Holy Grail is the Arthurian legend, King Arthur, Excalibur, sort of the Holy Grail. Or the Holy Grail is the Western literary allusions, Western literary allusions, the references have and ideas from Buddhism and Upanishads have the Indian knowledge tradition, which is the Upanishads to suggest survival amid cultural decay. Cultural decay, land constant state of confusion the label na poiching itoro the zuko have the cultural decay le of the hingna bona the kari knowledge se kamina logani kokani ko we reference kari in even level. Modernism extended beyond 1930s and evolved after World War II. On the modernism se makhatana le ko 1930s se khangde le pana te na mut ke pana te na 1930s matunda which evolved story World War II matunda ko Frank Kermode described two phases and he described the way Paleo-modernism represented by writers such as Eliot, Joyce, and Pound before the 1930s, 1930s mamang da na Paleo-modernism in Lowy, and Neo-modernism or Postmodernism associated with later writers like Gertrude Stein, Wallace Stevens, and Virginia Woolf. Category any thong na Frank Kermode in the Paleo-modernism in the 1930s mamang da lakpa Eliot, Joyce, Ezra Pound, Henba, aduga neo-modernism natraka post-modernism ko sinamu akhoi Gertrude Stein ko American writer ko Wallace Stevens our Virginia Woolf in the Matung Tarapasico, Moina Muk, Neo Modernism, the Ching and Lower one. I think it's like logical. Paleomodernism emphasized quality, perfection, and intellectual difficulty, producing long, elite works rich in classical references. Oh, na Paleomodernism na kari yaw have kan mo works in have ko. Quality like to perfection follow to ba intellectually difficult or challenging to have ko pa ko da. Oh, na mo asang ba yang elite ko have the myam naga isam line understand to ngam to ko elite works. Aduga rich in classical references. Classical I have the Roman, Greeks, writings or writers in the reference to be all. It was linked to Christian, nationalist, or even fascist ideas. Fascism ideas because Chilean level, privileging nation state over individual autonomy. Oh, no, nation state, the collective good of the nation have the focus people, individual autonomy have the individual freedom body, fascist state or fascist idea have the nation state in the lower. Meaning was seen as contextual and system-based, aligning with structuralism. On contextual way, structuralism ka follow to way ko paleomodernism ki meaning je combine understand to have kanta structuralist method to follow to way. Neo-modernism rejected elitism and perfection, arguing for equal value of all forms and viewpoints. Neo-modernism na mo elitism ka perfection ka reject away, kari argue to way ka have kanta equal value of all forms and viewpoints. Forms kudimang viewpoints kudimang to equal value thamba. It favored shorter, simpler works, avoided classical allusions, and embraced cultural and individual relativism. Aw na mo ka 10 ba works in the argument 10 ba simple be hen ba aduga classical allusions into avoid to mo aduga cultural amasung individual relativism to embrace to. Its fragmented literal language reflects a deconstructionist approach that questions stable meaning and exposes textual tension. Now, fragmented machui tab tungan tab language in ba deconstructionist approach have the hana like chumme and accepted or equally knowledge to good to aduga stable meaning je leite have the perfect meaning, stable meaning, or universally accepted over meaning have to leite na mo in law ko we in modernism aduga textual tension sing with a good left mo. Modernism is anti-traditional and anti-representational, defined by constant experimentation in art and literature. Now, modernism is the art and literature da yang toiba experimentation mo pangi. It introduced fragmentation, stream of consciousness, blank verse, and atonality. Now, fragmentation da introduced to modernism da stream of consciousness sai high the conversion of for James social introduced to give a technique to nika. Blank verse are the equity saying mukai mi bakanda poetic license some sinaraga rhyming system rhyming scheme way out of the blank verse ko and atonality har the music kumba da har kana wiki accepted form le henda ko music se ko option bi aba ko rule kumba follow to my lo biare while rejecting Victorian role of moral guide on a Victorian matam de ramba morality ko Victorian morality to reject over and fixed moral values on a moral values in the fixed on the ramba ko accepted or ramba fixed or ramba to reject over the wiki modernism do pangi amid aesthetic upheavals of 1890s to 1990s ki aesthetic ki upheaval have home ba so na ko do complexity is central to modernism on a complex way by the same modernism ki yamna maru magun na mane ko with criticism closely linked to creative practice. Criticism creative practice criticism ideals like obedience, patriotism, and religious certainty were questioned. We obedient over state nation state of obedient over patriot over habit sagi country now preference people over what is religious certainty. God is at the center of the question to modernism and linear narrative gave way to spatial form where meaning arises through patterns. Yamna systematic over mong the wari in a mukulam to guide it. Stream of consciousness guide jump over event the event the jump over proper form like the bar or the wari is a kind of makatar or have good late of the memory. I pity Yamna structured way to have it. Works such as the Westland, the Cantos, Westland in the Alien Evening, the Cantos, Arjuna, Ezra Pound Evening, and Ulysses, James Joyce Evening, use myth and symbolic structures like death and regeneration to shape modern experience for art. Namoina Mitsusine, aduka symbolic structure called death, kumba symbolic structure naraga, moina modern experience, art ki modern experience is shaped away. Modern kindness. Relationship between modernism and tradition ko si matang da koi modernism and tradition ki marta ka relation re da koi yen bata if we follow characteristics of modernism it will be evident that there is a paradoxical relationship between modernism and tradition ona akoina characteristics ko modernism ki characteristics se understand to no kona ba kan di evident orakani ko kari orakani ha ba kan da modernism ka tradition ki marta paradoxical oi ba amsu oi da ha bi mo ni ko paradoxical relationship ma akoina uba phagani on one hand, modernism seeks to liberate itself from inherited tradition of values, ideals, and cultural forms. On the side of the modernism na kari no liberate no freedom no inherited traditions of values. Have the hana the chatnaramba and the chume accepted or in the values ba ideals kumba cultural forms kumba do hana yam rigid obesimdo modagi tugairaga habitare modagi nantoga liberate toraga another form ko matomda sik to no na zaba madone there is a resistance to inherited culture a complete break with the past ona past ta hanna leramba rules boiro rigidity hai tare ko oiro mayam to tugaraga madudagi break to no hona ko madum le side madadi adubu atopa side madana kari hai ke ha kanda at the same time as on above there is a return to ancient myths from various cultures and religions with a deep sense of alienation loss and despair. Oh no, side of the young kind of deal. Return the move on you. Halakam habitat. Ancient myths, culture mayamgi. I have the example of my the Westland. The Westland, the Indian knowledge tradition, Upanishads, Yawi. Grail, Holy Grail lesson, Yawi. Madumia, Duna, Takpati, modernism say on one hand, Hana leramba past ki tradition culture mayam du nathung na bonda pa on the other hand madu mayam inherit to on a paradoxical by sineba these are the two phases positive and negative on the negative ka positive side of the modern as anti-traditional and anti-traditional way freedom and deprivation a living present and a dead past the never hiding is a call animak si marakta modernism ka tradition ni marakta paradoxical relationship lay is the never modern imagination is both liberated and alienated. On the modern liberation, modern imagination, liberated have the freedom to pange as well as alienated. So thus, modern writers in search of originality have gone back to ancient myths and tradition. On the modern writers in the originality, tina buhana moise ancient myths amasung traditions in the mu refer tꯧꯔꯒ ꯍꯥꯏꯕ ꯇꯥꯔꯦꯀꯣ depend ꯇꯧꯔꯒ ꯃꯣꯏꯅ ꯀꯩ ꯍꯥꯏꯇꯥꯔꯦ originality ꯐꯪꯗꯕ ꯈꯣꯠꯅꯩ So mathanggi slide da what is modernist poetry have the analysis tawne ko modernist poetry breaks sharply from past traditions and is defined by stylistic and technical diversity rather than a single movement. Now, modernist poetry is hana leramba past tradition dagi ko yamna khenaba mawng amada irakpa oda karin define to have kanda stylistic amasung technical diversity khenaba mayam leba ko style da ju do technical level da ju ko yamna different way rather than a single movement. A single movement dang ne have the a key change lies in syntax, as poet abandons grammatical norms and conventional structure on a Han Leramba grammatical rules, ma'am, norms, ma'am, have it madu doga, madu to follow to the the conventional structure have it Han the accepted or a more saying me but say Sigi rules follow to example of more in higher again wiki Shakespeare sonnet say wiki rhyming scheme the ABAB CD CD EFF GG level the my labor rules in the Muna follow to the moving closer to symbolist practices on a symbolist practice move in a focus over here. Symbolist poets sought to convey truths indirectly through suggestion and metaphor. On directly high metaphor gumba suggestion gumba in a focus story exactly to the point having mota. Expressing emotion through symbols instead of direct statement. On direct statement in mota symbols on decision. This approach termed the objective correlative by T.S. Eliot. T.S. Eliot is mangi sereng ko the objective correlative and SME ramaniko madu yawiko communicates feeling through patterns of images or situations using techniques such as free verse, symbolic imagery, and synesthesia. Ona T.S. Eliot na magi objective correlative sinaraga free verse kumba mong sinaraga symbolic imagery sinaraga akhoi feeling ko kuna power writer na iramba column ba kuna para power feeling myamje wiki free verse kumba symbolic imagery ko synesthesia kumba sinaraga pattern of images to understand to ngame communicate to ngame An example of modernist poetry example means modernist poetry is often difficult because it prioritizes dense imagery and intensity over clear logical meaning. On line logical meaning imagery am seen intensity am seen ko aduna kitang understand to the kitang challenging way A central example is The Wasteland by T.S. Eliot, which has drawn conflicting responses. On the Wasteland hariba poem sida yamna conflicting oiba karana accept wa karana tawdaba karana confusion leiba ko haiba tare karana yamna quality lei haiba karana kar challenge so dum yam uyi. Some see it as defeatist, reflecting personal and social despair. On a critic karana ko magi Wasteland paraga yamna defeatist of attitude ama abi defeated oiba give up to give up attitude ama social despair mu uyi hai. While F.R. Lewis described its rich disorganization, and F.R. Lewis have critical namu Westland je mana described to ko yamna rich oi magi disorganization je quality mo gunam chele as evidence of modern society's loss of cultural certainty on modern society the cultural certainty mangak pagi ko example amane na mana F.R. Lewis the lawe and spiritual vitality amasung cultural certainty mangak padugi yamna clear over reflection ne na Westland the lawe man. Technically, the poem creates meaning through shifts in experience and style. Na meaning kamai create we have kanda experience ka style the shift ama ohum ama la ka meaning create we. Sections such as a game of chess and the fire sermon contrast class, voice, and setting to suggest moral and social decline. On the matam dugi modern period ki moral and social decline dugu ki magi sections ko. So English sections a game of chess kumba the fire sermon gumana kudu. Eliot's use of earlier literature opposes a richer past to a degraded present. On a richer past, the degraded over present. I believe past na hena priority people past na hena thagat ko aduka present should be degraded order. The landing confusion me implying that modern civilization has corrupted what was once ordered and graceful. On the matamama the yam graceful or yam ordered or mamongdo modern civilization na corrupt tore degrade tore ko quality handa halena T.S. Eliot claim tore. I mean, T.S. Eliot masama yamna vocal over critic amane ko modernism gi modernism har kadi my writing na ko I the modernism in the sense that ki industrial revolution gumba ko the matam du ki science and technology ki advancement of the land gumba kai gi yamna vocal over critic na ma de to acceptable ngi de. The poem have the Westland contrasts Elizabethan grandeur with modern squalor. Have the modern times the lay of hingway mong ko yam na mot pa am na degraded with batum to scholar ko. but also suggests that idealized past love could be as empty as modernized or modern relationship. ꯃꯥꯅ suggest ꯇꯧꯏ idealized ꯇꯧꯕ past love ꯁꯦꯀꯣ ꯑꯩꯈꯣꯏꯒꯤ modern relationship ꯒꯤ ꯇꯥꯏꯞꯇ empty ꯑꯣꯏꯔꯝꯕꯁꯨ ꯌꯥꯏꯅ ꯃꯥꯅ claim ꯇꯧꯋꯦꯕ. Figures like Elizabeth and the typist saw both continuity and decline. Continuity only declines only raising doubts about whether Eliot is trapped in nostalgia. On Eliot said yes, Eliot writers imagine nostalgia the trap towards rather than simple moral judgment, he uses history and tradition to express personal unease. Mana moral judgment bagi muhutta history ga tradition ga sinaraga magi personal pain daba personal unease ko manuai jadaba myam man express to in the Westland, shifting styles and allusions distance Eliot from modern emotional emptiness, especially in typist episode and typist episode. Mana shifting oiba styles amasung allusions na Eliot say distance oiba modern emotional emptiness lagi. Yet the poem is not purely pessimistic. Adubu yana negative oiba na sagi defeatist oika have a key claim that the pessimistic te adum completely oiba na teba. In What the Thunder Said, Hindu concepts that Dayadhyam Damyata promote generosity, sympathy, and self-control, ending with Santi, a guarded note of hope. Honestly, no hope came with the yaw. Hindu concepts Datta Dayadhyam Damyata generosity, sympathy, self-control me amjamana palamebuka. Duga Santi man hanjan chan to hope amadi holame. Line 431. These fragments I have sowed against my ruins captures Eliot's central aim in the Westland. Eliot na mana Westland na kari hiding in obviously he gathers broken fragments from a once unified culture to shore up his own ruins, presenting himself amid the remnants of a shattered Western past. The poem becomes a testimony assembled from these fragments in an age of cultural collapse. On the poem is a testimony on a modern time that the cultural collapse testimony poems. Despite its bleak vision, poem ends with a faint hope, turning to non-Western religion for moral guidance. Yam bleak oiragasu yamna defeatist oiba maungda akoina power gasu akoigi hope amadi oiba loiramdaida ko faint oiba yamna macha amatang oirasu ko hope amadi thingnai. The thunder's word that the Dayadhyam Damyata call for giving, sympathy, and self-control, ending with Santi, which suggests a modest but genuine possibility of peace. Peace ama lakpi hai badu ko possibility to kudu holle. Summing up to be areko. The term modernist associated with 20th century matamdune bakoi modernist haiseko. Atuka dubu 20th century da horaga iramba kudima modernist haibadi lankani matuma leire ko. Ana moi is modernist haragadi arts da literature da music da dance da ko sculpture da architecture da yamna distinctive oiba imagination ni mong da sinaraga moi express tor kudu modernist ko. Afawa modernist writers kara haragana T.S. Eliot, W.B. Yeats, Ezra Pound, James Joyce, Virginia Woolf, D.S. Lawrence. Aduga Europe ke apaw modernist writers in Haragana, Rainer Maria Rilke, Marcel Proust, Kafka, amasung Thomas Mann. Simyam din ko. Already war poets sa Haragana with Wilfred Owen Siegfried Sassoon hoi lere ko Isaac Rosenberg moi myam ju yam famous poet ni but moi popularity do Eliot amasung yet so gi level yo bungam dra ju moi jam relevant hoye ona paleomodernism kam neomodernism kena base ko paleomodernism quality ma perfection gumba intellectual difficulty the focus to we neomodernism na elitism gumba perfection gumba se moi na discard to mo de horror ko ona paleomodernism the structuralist approach to we neomodernism the deconstruction to we ko masi myams ni ko ona westland to ko si kitang ni nare ko yam horror da aduga sum up to we are after a close after a close study of this unit on modern poetry, you would have learned Anderson the definition of modernism as literary term with reference to art and literature. On modernism, I would say literary term understand art and literature area. Two terms of paleomodernism and neomodernism and difference between them. On paleomodernism is karino, neomodernism is karino, aduga mabani ki marak kari kene. Characteristic of modernism with specific reference to modernist poetry or modernist poetry matangda koi characteristic of modern characteristic we understand tawre aduga relationship between tradition and modernism tradition ga modernism marakta paradoxical relationship leina sai hai gibe ko haibadi tradition jo modernism hai make it new higher ga jo moy traditional or classical antiquity the writers in the reference to lowi haina kujlowi aduga finally what constitutes modernist poetry and why modernist poetry is difficult poetry. Modernist poetry is a modernist poetry and low BI, aduga modernist poetry understand the difficult or no habit. I bet the complex or you so that is all for today. Matangi lecture a unit 3 the go atana modernism in poetry is atana ko analyze to gigani aduga hana clear or
Sì, lo iré, cosa.